Welcome back. This is 4.4, solving quadratic equations by the square root property and quadratic formula. So solving quadratic equations using the square root property and quadratic formula, determining the most efficient method to use when solving the quadratic equation, and using the quadratic formula to solve problems. Alright, this is a square root property. It just means that when you take the square root, you have your plus or minus of your answer, and you'll have that square rooted answer as your result. Alright, so we kind of did a little bit of this when we were solving in our last video, but we want to solve for x, so that means we want to get this x squared by itself first. So we're going to divide by 3. So we get x squared equals 6. Then we square root. So x is going to be plus or minus square root 6. So that means your answers are square root 6 and negatives square root 6. And you're going to leave them as square roots, not as decimals. So if you get a decimal in your calculator, you're going to leave it as the square root. Alright. Next, so this is by itself already, so we just square each side. So we have x minus 1 equals plus or minus 5. So what that means is that we're going to set that equal to 5. So you split up the two equations. So then we're going to add 5, so we get x equals 6. Add 1. Oh, I meant to add 1. I got the answer right, but my brain did not compute. So 6 plus 1. Oh gosh, I said it again. 5 plus 1 is 6. Sometimes just don't listen to me. Let's watch what the answer is going to be. Alright, and then this one is going to be negative 4. So 2 answers. So anytime you have a squared, that means you're going to have 2 answers. Or technically, whatever your degree is how many solutions you have for your equation. So always just check for that and make sure you're getting all of those answers. Alright, next we have quadratic formula. So we have our negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that is the quadratic formula. Make sure you know it, understand it, and kind of have it memorized. So just remember x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So just remember that. Remember it's a formula, so that means those values won't change. So it's always going to be that formula every time, and then you're just plugging in your values. Alright, so you have to identify A, B, and C. And then you can write your formula here. So negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Alright, so now we just plug in those values. So x equals negative b, so negative 9 plus or minus 9 squared minus 5 all divided by 2 times 2. Alright, and then you're just going to do your multiplication, adding and subtracting. So if you want, you can do that in your calculator. So 9 squared. Maybe it didn't do what I wanted it to do. Okay. So 9 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. So always make sure when you're plugging in numbers is that you put it with parentheses around it so that any negatives or anything get taken care of. All right, push enter. We get 121. So -9 plus or minus square root 121 all over 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. Then we see, can we square root 121? So then we go square root 121. And that did not get the whole number. So 121. Enter, and we get 11. So sometimes it's nice and you actually get the number you want out as a whole number. All right, since they're all whole numbers, that means we break it up into the two answers. So -9 and -9 minus 11 over 4. And then if you're putting it in your calculator, make sure you have parentheses around the top. So you're dividing by the whole thing and not just like 11 over 4. All right, 11 minus 9 is going to be 2 over 4, which is 1/2. -9 minus 11 is going to be -20 divided by 4. So that is going to give us -5. Now, since we got whole numbers out and they're not weird, that means we could have probably factored this equation. So you always want to see, can I factor it before applying the quadratic formula? Because sometimes the quadratic takes longer than actually trying to factor it. But it's nice for the ones when it's a value bigger than 1, because then you don't have to worry about, oh, what number do I need to divide out, or what GCF do I have to have? The quadratic formula will get rid of all of that and just give you your solutions. So it's nice that way. All right, you'll come across equations that aren't set to 0, so we have to move those to the other side with our x squared. So those cancel. So we get 2x squared minus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Then we have our A, B, and C. And you can check to see if you can factor. This one definitely won't, because it's a 2 times -1 and we want it to equal 4. And there's no factors of 2 that will ever add up to be 4. It could be 2, 1, or 3, but it won't ever be 4. All right, so let's set that up. So -b, so -4 plus or minus, remember those parentheses, -4 squared minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is -1, all over 2 times A. All right, negative makes a +4. And then we have -4 times -4, which is 16. -4 times 2 is -8 times -1, +8, all over 4. And then 16 plus 8 is going to be 24. You can also do that in your calculator. So -4 squared minus 4 times 2 times -1. We get 24. So up to you if you want to do it by hand or not. All right, then we see, can we square root 24? So square root 24, and it's a decimal. So we then see, can we break down the square root of 24? So 24, remember 2 and 12, 2 and 6, then 2, and 3. So remember, with square roots, we want pairs that can break out. And then 2 and 3 don't have a pair, so they stay inside and they multiply on the inside. So one of the 2's gets put on the outside. So we have 2, because remember, they're escaping, and only 1 makes it, if you remember that reference. Okay, so the 2 breaks out, leaves the 2 and 3 inside because they didn't have buddies to break them out. So it'd be 2 square root 6. And if you want to make sure that that's correct, so you do 2 square root 6, and it should equal that same decimal we got above. So see how they're the same? So we did it correct. All right, so we have x equals 6 all over 4. Now, when you're dealing with fractions, you want to make sure if you can reduce them in any way. So with the quadratic formula, if these 3 numbers, we don't include the square root, it's trapped. You can't break it out anymore. Nothing will help it. So you want to look at the numbers in front. And it looks like we can take out a 2 from each of those. So it'd be 2 plus or minus, and that's a 1 square root 6, so it'd be just square root 6 divided by 2. So your answers are 2 plus square root 6 over 2, and 2 minus square root 6 over 2. Now, if it asks for rounded numbers, you could do 0.49, because if you did the rounding of the last 2 decimals, so 8, 9, 8, it just would round to that 4.9. So x equals plus or minus 4.9. You just have to check and see, does it want accurate answers or decimals? Okay, so you just have to check how it wants the answer to be entered. All right, and then this just gives you a chart of the most efficient technique in solving quadratics. So you look, can it be factored? Then you factor it. And if it can't be factored, or you can't solve by square roots, you do quadratic formula. But if you can solve by square roots, you use that square root property. And then if you can't use either of those, that quadratic formula, it's a good way to go. And then it gives you examples of those. All right, that is it for the notes. So go ahead and work on your assignment and let me know if you have any questions.